Lately, I've been asked a question that I have not been asked for a long time, for whatever reason. Lately, I've been getting asked it multiple times. And I remember the first time I ever was asked this question, thinking, that is the greatest question on earth. And I know in my heart, I know the answer, but I didn't have it ready. I was like, I lived this journey. Of course I have this answer, but now that I think about it, I don't know. I need to know this. Because this question is, how do I rid myself of my pride? I get asked this question because I spend a lot of time talking to people about pride and about how pride comes to you as a best friend. For many people, it comes to you as your only friend, the only one that's ever had your back, your best friend. It is the reason you feel good about life at all for a lot of people, and it was for me. So I talk to people a lot about how pride is actually our enemy. And it is the snake within us that wants nothing more than to harm us and destroy us slowly while continuing to convince us that it's our friend. And this is a really hard thing to convince people of. Because like I said, I've had somebody actually say this to me, that pride is my best friend. It is what saved my life. I've heard people tell me that pride is what got them out of addiction. And that's an interesting case. But it always comes to you as a comforter, a savior. And I only get asked this question, how do I rid myself of pride, when I've actually successfully shown somebody the enemy that it is to us. Usually that goes into my story, The moment I found that pride was the enemy in me was the most humiliating moment of my life. Because I had spent many years rejecting the world, rejecting society, based off of being able to see the pride in, chasing money or validating myself through the opinions of women, all these other struggles that other men had. I was able to see right through that. And I was like, that's pride. I don't agree with that. I don't need that. I don't need anybody. I can just live out of this backpack alone and go work hard jobs and go adventure the world by myself and be just fine, thank you. So as, I could see other people's pride plain as day, but I couldn't see it in me, in myself. But little did I know, up until that moment, that pride was the reason I had ever done anything. It is what propelled me through this life. My pride was all I had. And it's what got me out of that sleeping bag every morning. I was living in a tent in the woods for 2 years at this point. And I knew that. It was I called it to myself, it was my fuel source. That's what drove me. And I had come to have this identity that I kind of, I guess, valued. I was like this strong person who has this crazy story, and I'm just out here adventuring, and I saw through the rat race of society, and I found an identity in myself that I could at least halfway accept. The moment I found out that it was all built on junk, something I didn't agree with, it was humiliating. I was like, look at me, how much smarter I thought I was than everybody else. But couldn't spiritually see past the spiritual tip of my own nose. I didn't want to admit that to myself for many reasons. A, it's humiliating. But B, it's because I didn't have a better idea. And to turn away from pride would mean to sacrifice the only thing I have. I don't have a family. I don't have friends at this point. I don't have anything in this world but this tiny little pride. This tiny little seed is all I got left. And I remember being in the woods yelling, "You want this too. You've already taken everything from me. After I've had everything taken from me, I never gained anything. Everybody I've ever met has more than me. All I have is this. And now you want that. I don't know who I thought I was talking to. The universe, I guess. Now I do. I was talking to God. I was bawling. I was angry. I was so mad. But it was like a little voice came back in me. And it said, but it's the truth. I'm not doing this to you. Nobody's doing this to you. It's just the truth. You know, and then the question came to me, it's just like, well, am I strong enough to accept that? As strong as I think I am, and as willing as I am to suffer in this world, am I willing to do it for the truth? Am I strong enough to push that one little chip I have to the middle of the table? And I decided, still surprises me, but I decided yes. I don't agree with that chip. And I don't care if it's all I got. The world can have it. I don't want it. Perhaps I don't get out of this sleeping bag in the morning. Perhaps this is it. But I'm going to take my chances. I'm all in. Interestingly, I'm all in for truth. Truth is more important than myself. I made that decision then. Yet, I didn't know what tomorrow looks like now. I didn't. Because all I'd ever done is pride. And now that I didn't like it, I didn't even know how else to act. I didn't know what to do tomorrow. I didn't know how to rid myself of it or live a different life. I didn't know how to do any of that. And I remember it was so funny. I got up the next day and I did get out of that sleeping bag. I had work. So I went and hauled everything, my 86-pound bag and my tool bag, which was probably another 40 pounds, hand tools. I went to the bus stop. And you remember, my whole thing was, leave me alone. I'm not going to make eye contact. If you do, I'm going to stare you down. You better stop or I'm going to create problems. I remember as I'm getting on that bus, it hit me. No more of that. No more of that. That's your pride. We're not doing that anymore. What are you scared to make eye contact? You're too strong for that. Look what you did last night. Look what you did up until now. You don't need to do that. And so I don't remember who it was. You know, it was about 3 days after that night at the crossroads, the great all right, I call it. It was about 3 days before the answer came to me and I had something to pursue, a new way to live. But I was in limbo for a few days, angrier than I'd ever been. But I remember sitting down and somebody on the bus looked at me with these kind eyes. You know, I've got, remember, an 86-pound giant metal frame backpack with me, and so it creates attention. And I remember with every fiber of my being, forcing myself to make eye contact with that person and give them a little, this forced smile. I have no idea what it looked like, probably pretty terrible, but I did it. And one big reason why I avoided eye contact is because I don't want any conversation. And so I already knew what was coming next. I knew. I made eye contact, gave him this Michael Myers grimace, and they asked, what's with the pack? I had no plan on how to rid myself of pride before this moment, but in this moment, it came. Because my life, you couldn't ask me a question about my life without it being extremely interesting, having and I don't mean, and I'm not saying that to boast. There's a reason I'm saying this. It was not something that I actively went out and tried to gain attention for, but the big backpack gains attention. I can't go anywhere without somebody asking me a question about me. And then I can't say any real truthful answer without it producing more questions. And, they'd ask me a question about my life and I'd give them an answer and they'd be like, oh, they'd like straighten themselves up and be like, well, it's like suddenly they're treating me like somebody that they have to straighten up in the presence of. And I'm like, not that guy. But my life was interesting. Home life, runaway, group homes, cycled through the group homes, in and out of jail, very crime-ridden, sticking guns in people's faces, then finally running from a high-security group home just to be on the run from the law at 17, 18 years old for a while, going to jail for armed robbery, getting out, doing this, and then finally when I'm off of all the probation, I put on that backpack and I've been drifting the country ever since. Just came from Kodiak Island, living on boats and stuff. Like, you couldn't ask me a single question without it producing a very interesting answer and them changing the way that they were in front of me. And whether I did it to have my pride fed or not, I knew that there was something in me that the moment this person asked me about my pack, this answer that rose up in me almost did so on its own, and I checked it and I allowed it to happen. But it was only in the moment that I was saying it did I realize what was happening. And I looked that person right in their face and I said, my mom and dad kicked me out of the house because I'm 27 years old. And they're tired of me mooching off of them. I produced the most pathetic, false story of my life I could think of on the spot. The opposite of my life. I don't have a mom and dad. And I haven't lived with a guardian since I was 14. But that shut down the questioning they're like, oh, okay. That whole thing. It was the opposite of what I was used to. It was very interesting to see that, actually. But I remember as soon as I said that and they looked away, this childlike laughter I had to stuff down. It just rose up in me. This energy shot through my body all the way to my fingertips and my toe tips. And I just remember thinking, that was it right there. I remember almost thinking to myself, this hardening against me, looking over at the snake, my pride, and being like, how'd you like that? You see what I did there, right? Not what you want me to do, right? Because that's how it was in the woods, My best friend was my pride, and I had named it the snake. There was this spiritual court case happening in me for many months while I was in the woods. And this night, this moment I came to the crossroads, it was like the head of that moment. It was like the big buildup was coming, and here comes the verdict from the judge. And so, boom. Suddenly I blinked one day in those woods, and my best friend, my only friend who had got me through my entire life and had a pretty good case to stay in control of my life. Suddenly I blinked and I was looking at that snake serpent through bars. Wasn't my friend. This whole time he was my captor, and I was in a cage. And so in that moment that I lied to that person and told them the most pathetic story I could come up with, that was me going on the offensive against my pride. I'm stepping away from you actively, and I'm doing whatever it takes. Do you see it? I don't care what it takes. I don't care what people think of me. I don't care what happens to me. You will never be in control of my life ever again. And it was just this joy came into me. Like I had never felt this joy before. And so from then on, it became a game. I would be in the tent at night and I would just be smiling and reading books. I was like reading a lot of Jack London and a lot of like classic literature at the time. I read Crime and Punishment, perfect book for me at that point. And I would at night before falling asleep, I would come up with these lies I could tell about my life. If people ask me this, oh, I'll say this. And I would just be out there laughing to myself like, this is awesome. My battle plan against pride. I just remember thinking it's got to be pathetic, and it's got to be something that I would never do, you know. It's something that I could never be prideful about. And I did that. And like I said, so there was about 3 days in between the great all right, the moment I turned away from the serpent and leapt into blackness, until now I can say the Lord gave me the goal for the rest of my life. So I didn't have a why. I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know what tomorrow looked like. It's very interesting, actually, that Romans chapter 11, you know, my username, my channel name is Wild Olive Shoot. Well, that comes from Romans chapter 11. And it says that the Gentiles were grafted into God's cultivated olive tree of life, and taken from an olive tree out in the wild, out in the boonies somewhere, out in the country where it's all wild and terrible. And he brought me into his garden. And he grafted me into his favorite prized tree called Israel. And now I love to think about it this way. I'm like, the great all right, the moment I turned away from pride was him snipping me off of that old wild olive tree. And then for 3 days, it was him carrying me over into his garden. And then the moment he gave me the revelation of the man who jumps on the grenade, that was the moment he grafted me in. And that's when I was given my why, what I was going to try to become for the rest of my life. Instead of pride, instead of serving that, I was going to serve this thing called love. Of course, I didn't connect it to God yet. But that moment of revelation, that was the greatest moment of my life. Because now I'm not in limbo anymore. Not only do I know what's my enemy, now I know my goal. Now I know what I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to become. And I was right about certain things. You know, what society offers you to fulfill yourself, it is junk. It is junk. Trying to fulfill yourself with other people's opinions or money or status. I was right about all that. It is all as worthless as you can possibly imagine and more. But that doesn't mean that life is inherently purposeless or meaningless. And look at me now. I've got a why. Because when I think of a man who is willing to jump on a grenade for people he loves, I don't care how humiliating it is to see how far away I am from that, from being a hero. But now I know, for the rest of my life, no matter what my life looks like, whether I'm in this tent till the day I die, whether I die in the van that I have now, it didn't matter what my life looked like. From my life on now, I'm going to inch closer to being somebody that can do that. What does that mean? It means that from now on, buddy, suck it up and make eye contact with people, because that's what love does. I don't care if you like it or not. What, are you scared? I know you're strong enough to do it. I know you're not weak. If you're strong enough to get rid of pride, then you're strong enough to make eye contact with people and start moving towards love. So that's one thing that I did. I went on the offensive. And I made it to where nobody could be impressed by me in any way, shape, or form. I went on this secret internal mission that nobody in the whole wide world knew about. Now I know it was me and God. And how beautiful is that? But at the moment, it was just me on this secret mission that nobody even knows about. I've never heard spoken about. I'm moving against the snake on my own terms, and I'm moving towards something I believe in for once. So could you imagine? I thought I was turning away and snipping off my only fuel source. Can you imagine what it was replaced by? Can you imagine what I felt like every single morning when I got up? After spending the whole night before thinking of ways, battle plans. And now, everything I do is for a reason I agree with. Willing to die for. I've always wanted something to serve something I'd be willing to die for. All men want that. I imagine women do too. It's in us. The man on the cross is in our hearts, imprinted, unremovable. And I found him. Could you imagine, knees to chest, march into the bus stop? I'm not joking. I've got friends that still remember me doing this. But I had my tool bag, 86 pounds on my back. The metal frame backpack was about as tall as me. And I started scooping up t-shirts full of rocks to carry in the other hand. March into the bus stop every single day. Then I'd get to work and just destroy everything in sight. I had so much energy, I felt like I could come through a brick wall like the Kool-Aid Man. The energy source that I was given in place of that, it's I don't even know how to explain it. I've had that passion ever since. That energy source never went away. And it just keeps getting better. But so when somebody asks me, how do I get rid of pride? I tell them, stop feeding it. First you have to figure out how it's being fed. And then don't just cut it off. Go after it. Do whatever it takes to destroy it and mean it. Don't do it lazily. Don't do it just because you feel like you have to or out of shame. Don't do it for that. Do it because you're on a mission of truth. It's because you want to act in a way that you agree with. Doesn't matter who's watching. That you want to have a life in service of something you are willing to die for as well. That's why you do this. You go to war with it. You go to war. If your way of being prideful is being the best person at your job, and you've had that job for a lot of years, quit. Go be the new guy somewhere in some other field, in some other job. If it's money, go get a lower paying job. Go work at McDonald's, buddy. And I mean that. I did that. Fallen from meth lord status in the island of Kodiak, which I thought was the most important thing I had ever done or been a part of in my whole life. Straight from that to McDonald's and Taco Bell wearing the schnauzer hat. That was perfect for me. That's what I needed. That's exactly what I needed. I needed a big kick in the chest, square on my butt. And that's how you have to treat pride. Once you make your decision and you don't want it in your life anymore, if you mean it, mean it. Make sure he knows that you're serious. Do whatever it takes. There's nothing else that matters more than this. Do whatever it takes. Do whatever it takes. Figure out how your pride is being fed. Figure out what way you're connected to getting that hit of status or pride or wealth or whatever it is, and go to war with it. If you make that decision in your heart that you're willing to do that, trust me, the Lord will give you a way to do it.